I want to make an automatic farm for the new trial spawners. And it's not to farm up the slime, silverfish, or types of zombies, skeletons, and spiders, but instead for the loot that comes out of the trial spawners when they are completed by killing all the mobs they spawn. Besides giving consumable loot, they also give the new trial key. Its use is unknown at the moment, but it's sure to open up something really cool. So I want to make a farm that can get tons of these all automatically. Plus, as you guys know, I'm on a quest to design an automatic farm for everything in the game of Minecraft. I've already made farms for 95% of all items in the game, and the trial key is going to be no exception. Hello there, Ray here, and right after the release of the new trial chambers, I designed some new farms. To start out, we need to figure out how close does the player have to be before the spawner will turn on. Well, it turns out it is exactly 14 blocks, and then it will start producing mobs. So we need to make sure the player's AFKing within 14 blocks. But how far out from the spawner do they get placed in? It seems like they're getting placed in pretty close around the edge. So getting a copy of the spawner and testing it out here, I noticed that they can spawn anywhere where there is glass. But they wouldn't spawn out any further, so they couldn't spawn onto these netherrack blocks. So it turns out the trial spawner is placing in mobs within 4 blocks of it, anywhere around it like a sphere. This is different than the typical monster spawner, which would spawn them inside of a cubed area. And also, unlike a traditional spawner, these can't spawn the mobs in mid-air. Notice that we have no mobs spawning because it needs a valid block. So something with a solid top will let mobs spawn on top of it. So stuff like glass or slabs and etc. won't work. So they won't spawn directly inside of water. But the spawner is also unique where it needs a line of sight in order to place in the mob. So this spawner needs to be able to see the location of where it wants to place in the mob. So any blocks that are slightly higher, the spawner can't actually see the top of this block, so it won't summon anything on top of that. So it can spawn stuff like on top of the spawner because it can see it, but the rest of our spawning platform needs to be below the spawner. And unlike your typical spawner, mobs in these can spawn even when there is tons of light. Now to get the trial spawner's loot, we need to have all the mobs killed. But do we actually have to kill them ourselves? Notice that these mobs are actually just dying from burning in the sunlight. And when they die off, the mob spawner considers that a successful win and it will open up giving us our loot. So to defeat the trial, we just need to have all the mobs die. It actually turns out they don't even have to die. The spawner will also consider them dead if they are just moved 47 blocks away from the spawner or even into a different dimension. So here I have a spawner that is surrounded by nether portals like my nether portal farms I designed, and as soon as they spawn in, they are immediately teleported into the nether dimension. Right away you can see the spawner considers this also a win because there's no more mobs here and it will give us the loot. Now this is quite fast. Plus on the nether side you can go ahead and collect the mobs so that you can kill them if you actually want to get the loot that they produce. So you can have like a little mini mob grinder over here. Now obsidian could be considered a bit expensive, so I tried some magma blocks here, but this is now considered an invalid block ever since they changed it so that mobs will now check that they are resistant to fire before being spawned onto magma blocks. But when it comes to wither roses, mobs will actually spawn within the wither roses, so it's another way that you could kill them and also get the loot dropped. You can pick up the loot using Hopper minecart from underneath. But there is currently a bug related to loot when it comes to the skeletons that have poison arrows in their offhand, because even if they use a really high looting sword, they're supposed to drop their bow in their hand, but they don't drop the bow or the arrows that they're holding in their offhand. So hopefully this gets fixed and we can actually farm up the poison arrows that they're holding as well. But wither roses are a bit expensive, so then I went ahead and tried out some powder snow. Now powder snow could work for some of the mobs that come from the spawners like the zombies, spiders, silverfish, and slimes, but when it comes to the actual skeletons inside of powder snow will then start to convert over into stray mobs. And the crazy thing about these strays is that they're still holding the poisonous arrows. So when they hit you, they actually give you poison and slowness. Because they're strays to give the slowness, and because they have the poison arrows, they get poison as well. So a pretty cool mob to collect, especially if you can combine this with getting them on the day of Halloween, where they can spawn in with pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns. Plus, all the mobs that come from these type of spawners have persistence required, meaning that they'll never despawn no matter how far away you are from them. And when they actually convert over to strays, they will consider the skeletons as being missing, and they'll give you the loot as if you actually killed the mobs, even though they just got converted into strays. So this could actually work for a farm, except for some of the spawners actually spawn strays to start with, and strays don't take any damage from the powdered snow. But since the loot is pretty minor from the mobs, I decided to not even worry about that. And doing some more testing, I found out that they can spawn directly inside of fire, which makes this farm really cheap to build up. You just need to get some netherrack and light it on fire, and then it'll stay lit permanently. This also works for silverfish, slime, all the spider, zombie, and skeleton type, as they'll just burn up since none of them are resistant to fire. And once dead, spawner considers that a win. So now let's figure out how many mobs need to be killed before the trial is finished. So it turns out it is 6 mobs for a single player. So once it kills all 6 mobs and gives us the loot, then the spawner is on a cooldown, where it won't start up and produce more mobs until 30 minutes from now. So since we have to wait 30 minutes for the cooldown to go up, it's not such a big deal that the mobs don't die super fast, as it only takes them about a minute to go through all 6 mobs and kill them, and once it finishes, it will drop the item. But notice that the item is actually getting destroyed by the fire nearby. So I did try putting a hopper on top to pick up the item, but that did not work. And I also tried putting a hopper just underneath the spawner, hoping that the item would kind of clip through the spawner and could get picked up by the hopper underneath, but that also did not work. But what does work is having a hopper minecart on top, so when the item gets ejected, it'll be inside of this hopper, and the hopper checks for items that are not only above it, but also at the same level of it, and it'll pick it up and put it inside. So now we can watch this happen. Opens up and it ejects the item, and it gets immediately picked up by the hopper. But our hopper minecart will eventually fill up since it only has 5 slots. So we need to get these items out of here and into a storage area. So directly underneath of the spawner, I don't have a normal minecart, but I have a hopper minecart. And the hopper minecarts can pick up items up to 1 block above them, but it can't quite reach this hopper here. But if I go ahead and destroy this rail that is standing on top of, it will actually make the minecart drop a little bit lower, and this will make it within range so it can pick up those berries, and then it will eventually put them down into our storage down here. And that way we can transport all the items out so the farm can continue to work. So the setup seems quite cheap and simple to do, but if you really want to, you can actually detect when the spawner starts up, as well as changes its different states. Because it first starts out, the spawner is in the waiting phase, and then when the player gets close that's in survival, it goes into activation phase. There's also the ejecting phase, as well as when it ejects the item. And all 4 of those phases can be detected in case you want to do something like wash the mobs off a spawning platform every time this happens. You can even combine this with a skulk sensor, which can detect when mobs spawn in, so you can make sure to wash the mobs away only when they're there. So now that we can get our loot easily, what type of loot can we expect? Besides getting keys, it also gives a loot called consumables. This includes glowberries, baked potatoes, golden carrots, regeneration potions, strength potions, ender pearls, and emeralds. So food to keep you from going hungry during your fights, helpful potions to make the fight easier, and pearls to move about, especially when you're dealing with the blades, and a sort of currency being the emeralds. Now every time the spawner gives loot, there's a 50% chance it'll give a key, and then the other 50% chance it'll give something from the consumable loot table. So when it chooses consumables, it has a higher chance for the berries, emeralds, and potatoes, and smaller chance for the carrots, pearls, strength, and regen. Although the consumable loot isn't that useful, as you can always design farms specifically for each of these items that would be more efficient than this one. They did say that they might change the loot tables before the final release. And if they change anything else, I will be sure to put the latest version of this working farm in the description, so check there before you build it. Now the key loot is unlikely to change, and most likely will be quite useful. This key is also labeled as an ingredient, which puts it in the same category as all these items in the game. These are often items that are used in some type of crafting recipe or in some type of GUI like anvils. So maybe the key will be combined with something else to make something useful. But whatever it is, we will be ready with my key farms. Let's go down into the trial chambers and see where exactly should we actually put this farm in. Just like normal spawners, these spawners cannot be moved with pistons or be obtained using silk touch. So we'll have to build a farm at their location. There's a lot of trial spawners all throughout the chambers here. But if we're going to AFK in one spot, we want to activate as many of these spawners all for one area. We just need to be within 14 blocks of each of them. Like in this area here, we got a spawner over there, there, as well as there. So we're between 3 of them. And there's even one over here. So we can activate 4 of them by AFKing in one spot. That's usually these bigger rooms that have the most spawners. But there's actually one room that has even more than these. And that's these more vertical rooms. You start down here and then you'd have to work your way upwards going past one of these spawners. Then there's 2 more on this level. And then there is another 2 up here, making a total of 5 of them. And by AFKing right here, you can actually activate all 5. So I went ahead and placed in the nether rack as well as fires on top around each of the spawners. So we got 2 up here, we got 2 down here, and we got the single one down at the bottom. And rather than tearing out the walls to make the entire 9x9 area where it would normally spawn into our actual farm, I decided to just leave the walls in, which makes it a little bit easier to do, and just switched out the floor with our nether rack. Because if the spawner can't place them like over there, they'll just place them over here. But we do want to make sure that if we do have any spawning spaces like over here, which is technically still within its floor area, we don't want there to be any blocks over here that they can actually spawn on top of. And I also put in this wall right here just to prevent them from walking off of it. I did a similar setup for each of the different spawners. Even this spawner here that's kind of close to the wall, they'll just put the skeletons over here as well. Now we also don't want the skeletons spawning on top of the spawner, so make sure to put a block above it, since the game won't spawn mobs inside of anything that collides with them. And we also don't want the skeleton running around and then hopping up on top of the spawner and pushing our hopper minecart off of it. Now this place works really well for the skeletons, but if you're going to do this for the smaller mobs like the silverfish, spiders, and baby zombies, they could actually hop up there. In which case you just want to have a piston and push the block down on top of it. Now the hopper will still pick up items, but no mobs can actually get on top of it. And they also won't spawn up there because the spawner doesn't have direct view of the top of this block. You also want to change up other things like the walls here. Instead of just being a single block across, you might want to fill this all in so that the smaller mobs can't crawl through the bottom. Or for stuff like spiders, you might also want to put a top onto this so they can't climb up the wall and get away from the fire. Or you can put little overhangs like this so that when they do climb up, they just get caught underneath of this block. Let's go ahead and run the farm. You just AFK here, and then when you're in survival, farms will automatically activate and start spawning in the mobs directly into the fire. And if we go ahead and look downwards, we can see that even this farm that's way down here on the bottom still activates despite the player being up here. And I put in some glass so you can kind of watch the mobs spawn in and die, which is kind of fun. So now you can hear all the spawners are finished and they are giving out the rewards. All the rewards are getting picked up and I just have them being placed into these chests down here. You can see we're getting a lot of keys already. But we can actually make this farm even more efficient. That's because once you start up the farm, you can actually leave this entire area as long as it's being loaded, such as with like my chunk loaders. It will continue to keep summoning in mobs and will finish off and drop the items. So coming back, we can see that it already finished up and it dropped the items without the player even having to be here. So rather than just having the player sit in one spot, we can put the player in a minecart and actually move them throughout the entire trial chambers. This structure here got pretty lucky where there's actually 2 of these vertical rooms with 5 spawners each. So you can actually get a total of 10 of them right beside each other. But you can also move the player between all the other spawners that are throughout the structure. Once you pass by them, they automatically activate and then the farms will do the rest. But it turns out these structures are actually pretty common in the world, so if you wanted to, you can even have chunk loaders here, and then have the player continue with the minecart into a completely different structure to activate more of them. Or you can move the player through nether portals, which would make the travel very short. You can also choose to get the most out of your AFKing player by having other farms in the location, especially ones that need the player, such as ones that depend on random ticks, such as growing crops. And since you only need to come back every 30 minutes to reactivate them, you can activate quite a few of them throughout your world before having to loop back again. And if you really want to go all out, by having multiple players in the area when starting it up, you'll get more loot. So you could have a couple players all doing the same circuits. So with the 30-minute cooldown, you can activate it twice every hour, or you'll have a 50% chance of getting a key, meaning you get about 1 key per hour per farm. So the more farms you have, the more keys you'll get per hour. Now see how I made an automatic farm for every other item in the game of Minecraft with this playlist here. Or join my live streams every Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, where I'm always experimenting with the newest things in Minecraft. And if you're a supporter of mine, you get lots of perks, including getting your name here at the end. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye!